You're listening to the Good Food CFO podcast, where we challenge the status quo of the food industry, celebrate good food founders who are building businesses on their own terms, introduce industry disruptors, and are redefining equitability. If you're ready to build your financial confidence and join the good food revolution to change the way the food industry does business, you are in the right place. I'm the Good Food CFO and your host, Sarah Delavan. Today on the podcast, we need to talk about money, and we're going to do just that. But first, I'm joined by our podcast producer, Chelsea Stier, and we're going to fill you in on some exciting changes happening right here on the podcast. Chelsea, welcome to season 8.
Hello, I am so happy to be here.
So Chelsea is not only our podcast producer, but she's also our director of communications and the community director at the Good Food CFO. And many of you may recognize her or her voice from the new member events that we hold inside the Good Food CFO community, as well as the lives that Chelsea and I do every single Tuesday. But for those listening who don't know you yet, Chelsea, can you share a little bit about yourself?
Like I said, I'm so happy to be here. I do want to share just a little bit about my experience. I've worked in food and beverage pretty much since the day I started working. I worked in restaurants all through high school and college. And then prior to my role here at the Good Food CFO, I was actually with Starbucks for 12 years. I started out as a barista, making coffee, but I did become a store manager for Starbucks, and I had the opportunity there to run multiple stores that ranged from like $2 million in annual revenue to $4 million.
Wow.
And then I had teams that ranged from 20 partners, we called them partners, to up to 40 partners on my team. Yeah, so it was a lot. And I was responsible not just for the staffing, right? Not just for sales, but for the operations and the inventory and the P&L. And so I bring a lot of that knowledge with me here. It's not exactly the same, right, as creating a food product, but it's still similar. So I do have some background there, some knowledge. And then I've been here now, as you said, at the Good Food CFO, getting to work with our community and with the podcast, the communication at large, right? And our messaging and really what we want to do in the world. And what I love about my role here is that it allows me to challenge the status quo, something that we do every single day. It allows me to be of service to others, right? To be part of something bigger than myself, which is really important to me. And it allows me to drive connection through community, which is a huge part of what fills my cup and like what drives me. So I'm just so glad to be here. I'm glad to join you and to talk about the evolution of the podcast and really what's next for us.
Yeah. I want to share that Chelsea, after leaving Starbucks, which, you had worked through COVID, you had been just really, I think, as anyone in retail and, customer facing, especially in the high volume stores that you worked in, you made the conscious decision to step away from that type of work, from that sort of lifestyle that comes along with that kind of work. It's very similar to what we're asking a lot of founders to do, right? Is to like make a change in their life that suits them better, right?
Yeah.
To change the way that they're living their day to day or how they're running their businesses, right? So that we're sort of happy on every level. And there's a lot of that in building a business on your own terms, and you emulate that, in the choices that you made as you moved from Starbucks and kind of figured out, what you
Yeah.
wanted to do next.
And what was next for me. Yeah. And I don't want to, I guess, glamorize that at all in the sense that, like, I want to be really clear. It took me a long time to make that
Yeah.
decision.
Yeah.
I would say that the pandemic really did change the way that I saw my work and
Yeah.
and the way that it felt to go to work every day, right? I worked for what I still believe is a great company, but it just the whole industry changed,
Yeah.
right? And it wasn't an easy decision. It took me a long time to come to, and there was a lot of fear involved in that, which I'm sure that a lot of people can relate to,
Yeah.
right? When it comes to really meeting your own needs and like you're talking about, right? Your own terms. And so, yeah, it's not something that's easy, but I can say sitting on the other side now, it's something that is so worth it.
Yeah.
So worth it.
Yeah. And one of the things that has stuck with me that you said, once you were really ingrained in what we were doing, you're like, I'm not here because I know you or because I like you. I am here because of what we're doing. I am here for the cause. And I thought,
Hmm.
yes, yes, that's perfect. And you are joining me for this episode where we get to announce some really exciting changes.
Yeah.
And the first change that I want to announce is that the Good Food CFO podcast is officially going weekly beginning
Yes.
this season. So we will be dropping brand new episodes every single Monday, every season. I am so excited about this. And Chelsea, I think we should talk about some of the big reasons why we made this decision.
Yeah. Number one, we have so many ideas.
Yes.
I think that, we meet every week about the podcast
Yep.
and going through who do we want to have on the podcast? What are the things that are important for us to talk about?
Yep.
And we have, especially I think as our network has grown too through the
Mm-hmm.
podcast, so many people and so many conversations that we want to have that, I know you've said this, it starts to feel bad
Yeah.
when we're looking at a season that lasts 10 episodes, but that's 20 weeks. That's almost half the year,
Yep.
right? And so to only be able to have those 10 conversations in that 6 month period, 20 conversations over a year, there was so much that we felt like we were leaving on the table.
Yeah. And it just feels really, really good to be launching season 8 as a weekly podcast. It's really,
And
really
I think
exciting.
to be able to have the conversations at the velocity that we want to have them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Really, that's the point.
Yeah.
So weekly, that's announcement number one. Number two in the evolution is the format of the episodes.
Yeah. So going back to one of our values, right? And to say, are we doing things in alignment? Are we doing things the best we possibly can? Are we happy with what we're putting out into the world in all the ways we're creating content and hopefully adding value? And really thought about this a lot. And I thought back to when I first launched the podcast. When you're doing something new for the first time, at least what I did was I looked around at how were other people in my industry creating podcasts and what were their
Mm-hmm.
podcasts like. And I listened to lots of podcasts and I made decisions around, how would the intro sound? Would I do it or would someone else do it? What would the music be like? And what would the format be like? And what kind of content would I deliver? And I had very specific ideas, after I did my research and I launched the best podcast I knew how. In season 4, there was so much happening within the food industry with my clients, with our community members, that I had reached a boiling point and released episode 49 and really talked about how, it's no longer just about building a profitable business or building a sustainable business, but we need to change this food industry. And that period of time, which really encompassed a number of months, but kind of culminated in an episode, really changed, I think, the mission and the focus of the podcast and sort of further specified, if that's the right way to say it, the types of content and episodes that we wanted to bring to people. And, now as we were getting into season 8 and you and I were talking about the changes that would come to the podcast, you actually brought something up to me, and I'm going to let you share that, Chelsea, because I think that it's like so valid
Yeah.
and fun and exciting. But go ahead and share kind of what you shared with me.
Yeah. So, as we've already said, I do produce this podcast, I do edit this podcast. So, I see it from beginning to end every episode, all the stuff that ends up on the cutting room floor. But even more than that, I'm in the conversations when we're conceptualizing, right? And when you're talking about the things that are on your mind, the episodes that you want to record, the messages that you want to put out there. And in those conversations, I always see the passion, the excitement, the frustration, the anger,
Yeah.
come out of you. It's so natural, and it's so clear how passionate you are about not just good food industry, right?
Mm-hmm.
But changing it, making it better, making it more equitable, and helping and being of service to founders. And then you'll go and I'm like, yes, this is a great idea. We need to do this episode. And, you'll go off and kind of create your outline, get your thoughts together, record the episode. And then I go to edit it and I'm like, oh, well, she was more excited when we talked about it. Right.
Yeah.
And we've had that conversation. And I think, I know you have thoughts around this, but I, I get, right. When you go into a room alone, it's harder, right?
Yeah.
To have those same natural feelings
Yeah.
come out.
Yeah. And I think that, and perhaps this is like a holdover from, what I just talked about, with like how other people may create their podcasts and sort of what I've seen other people do, and maybe what is professional or not professional, right? Is like be put together, have articulate thoughts, be very organized with what you are presenting, and doing that in a room by myself. I'm still passionate and excited about everything that we talk about here, but it doesn't necessarily translate in terms of how I feel on the inside when I'm just speaking to myself in a camera. My most passionate episode ever was episode 49, where it was completely unscripted. And I just was angry and frustrated and I went at it. But, it's difficult to do that when I have a topic that I need to share, in a
Yeah.
specific kind of way.
Yeah. I was just going to say, not even was episode 49 unscripted. It was actually scripted. And then in the middle of recording, you threw the script out
Yes, it was. Yeah,
and
it
you were like,
became an
nope.
unplanned episode. Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
was trying to record something that was scripted. Yeah, that's right. And just was like, nope, not this, not today. Can't do it.
Yeah.
It was overtaken.
Yeah.
Um, but so, and in fact, like there's an episode that I've been working on that hasn't aired because when I would come to sit down to record it on my own, I was having trouble communicating and articulating in the way that I wanted to. But meanwhile, when I was having conversations about it, I was passionate and fired up and animated. And what you said to me was something to the effect of, I think people need to see this side of you on
Hmm.
the podcast, and it doesn't need to be as polished and put together perhaps as it is when it's a scripted episode that you're presenting on your own.
Yeah.
And so the exciting sort of announcement, I suppose, that comes from this revelation is that you're not just joining me for this episode today, but you're
Yeah.
going to be joining me at the beginning of every episode and at the end of episodes as well. In the intros, they're going to be different from week to week, but we're going to be talking about what's going on in the industry, what what news is there. These are things we talk about in the community and in the community lives, but we want to take them to a bigger platform because
Yeah.
we're trying to break away from traditional business media, right? We believe that there's some good information out there, sure, but there's a lot of misguided information out there. There's a lot of stories that aren't told, and we want to tell those. And we think that we need to be bringing industry news, we need to be bringing frustrating things, we need to be bringing celebratory things to this podcast weekly to keep that conversation going, and to
Yeah.
keep the revolution moving forward. And when I do have what would traditionally be a solo episode, if you will be joining me to a have conversation with me, right? In some instances, to bring back the sort of naturalness to the conversation, because Lord knows I will get fired up. The real
Yep.
passion and feelings will come out, and that's what we want. We want to be authentic and tell real stories, of our own here on the podcast. And so I'm looking forward to that with your business experience that you do have, but while not having been a food founder yourself, you bring a great perspective to the conversation as well, because you can ask questions very
Yeah.
insightfully on behalf of food founders. And that's something that I'm excited about because it can happen sort of in real time on the episode, which I think is really, really cool.
Yeah.
And at the end of episodes, we'll come back together and do a little recap. If we've got a guest on, we'll talk about, maybe some community updates and things like that. And I'm just really excited to kind of bring what we do weekly in our community lives to the podcast. It's
The
really
podcast
exciting.
itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It really has been an evolution, I think, from what we're doing in the community and bringing it to the podcast. And they really are one and the same, right? And so why not? Why would that not be the next natural step?
Yeah.
Another thing I think we should talk about too, and kind of let everyone know is going to be happening this season, you will also be hearing community updates.
Yeah.
We've been talking about the community here in this episode, but we're going to be sharing updates about the community in every episode. And a lot of times you'll hear that mid episode, we'll take a short break and talk about what's happening in the community in terms of live events, Q&As, fireside chat. We have another announcement coming up in a few weeks that we're really excited to share around the community. And then also, if we have a new course or a workshop or a service that we want to share with you, just so that you know what's available to you inside the community. Ultimately, our goal is to be of service and to support good food founders in building a business on their own terms. And so we just want to make sure that everyone here listening knows exactly what's available to them, inside the Good Food CFO community. So you will hear those as well.
Yeah. And I think it will be fun because you're going to hear from me, you're going to hear from you, Chelsea, and oftentimes you'll hear from the guests that will be joining us in the community, which I think is really fun.
Yeah.
And just like a nice way to mix it up and as you said, to keep people well informed. Now that we've shared all of the exciting updates that we have for this episode, let's talk about money.
Yeah. Let's talk about money. I am so excited to have this conversation with you. It's one that we've been kind of having back and forth since your birthday. And I'd love for you to share how it came about, how the thought really entered your mind, and then let's get into it.
Yeah. So my husband and I typically will go away for like a week or so around my birthday. It's late August. It's a great time to kind of get away at the end of summer. And we spent a couple of days in the woods in Big Sur, and we spent a couple of days in different cities along the coast. And this strange thing was happening in every city that we were in. My husband and I, his name is Nathan, we would be sitting at a restaurant or sitting at a bar having a drink, and there would be a small group of men sitting together talking about business, but not just business, money and their successes. And, there were several celebrations, and it was like everyone else in the room was quiet and I can just hear their conversation. And I was enthralled. And after hearing like three or four of these conversations throughout the week in different cities, I came back to you, Chelsea, and I was like, I've really been thinking a lot about this, and that these men were talking about business and money and their success in ways that I never talk to women about those same things. And I was like, why? Why is that the case? And, you know, I talk on social media and stuff about how I get together with usually women on Friday mornings, and we have coffee. Some of these women I meet with on a regular basis, some I'm meeting for the first time. I try to get out maybe every other month to have coffee with some, founders in the city. And we talk about business, but we talk about how are we feeling about business, and we talk about, what we're doing, but we don't get into specifics. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't know the last time someone said to me, "Hey, Sarah, I am so proud of myself," or "I'm so excited and I want to celebrate with you. I just made X thousands of dollars," or "I
Mm-hmm.
just closed a deal and put a value on it." There was just something that struck me about the specificity that these guys were talking about business. And it wasn't all wins, wins, wins. It was the gamut. Hard times,
Yeah.
good times, all of it. But it was so specific. And that's
And
what really stood out.
the thing that really struck me too about, when you were telling me about this, that you had witnessed this, right, was you very clearly said like it didn't seem showy or
No.
like there was no ego around it. It was just transparent conversation around business and around money.
Yeah, and the other thing I think too was like, in particular, I'm thinking of this one really small wine bar that we were sitting in, and there were three guys, and they were sharing a bottle of white wine. And one of the men was celebrating the sale of something that he had worked on for years. He had invested time, he had invested money. The other men who were there knew, how much time and energy and effort he had invested. And he was celebrating the amount of money that he was going to earn from this sale. And they were all genuinely proud of him. And they weren't just talking about the money, they were recognizing his work, they were recognizing the time, and they were celebrating what he could do with that money.
Mm-hmm.
It was, it's so weird to say, but it was like beautiful. It wasn't broy, as I think some people would stereotypically think that it was. And it definitely got me thinking like that could be a group of women sitting over there talking about that, but it's not. And I don't hear, and I'm not part of those kinds of transparent
Yeah.
conversations.
So, I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is why or why not, right?
Yeah.
What do you think it is that holds us back from having those kinds of conversations?
I think that that is such a complicated question to answer, but
Loaded.
so yeah, so loaded. But I think, I am not a, a doctor. I don't study humans, right? I do happen to be a woman though. And I think that, myself and other women that I know, like it's not good to talk about money in general, like period, good, bad, or otherwise. I know friends that like don't share how much they pay in rent, or they don't share what their mortgage is. I don't know how much savings or lack of savings they have in their bank account. Like we don't know anything about each other's like financial world. And I think it's just generally an uncomfortable topic to talk about. I also think though that except in certain places, like I've been a part of like coaching groups where we are talking about money because that's the work to be done. But even then, it's not always explicit. Like it's a big celebration of money, but it's not talked about if like you lost money or if like you didn't hit a goal, right? So
Mm,
it's sort of one-sided conversation in that kind of space. but I think it can be hard for women to talk about the good and to talk about the bad. And there's this article that I read for back in 2018, an author by the name of Jessica Knoll, who is pretty famous at this point. She's written a number of number one bestsellers. She's, written movies that have been number one on Netflix. But she wrote an article called "I Want to Be Rich and I'm Not Sorry." And I remember when I read that back in 2018, I was like, that's the attitude that I want to have in life, and that's the attitude that I want other women to have too. And in that article, and maybe we can link to it in the show notes, but she talks about the differences between men and women, and how in her world there was an author, a male author, who was like, my book sold into 27 countries, and I think that that's like I've broken a record. And she was like, I knew that he didn't break a record because mine sold into 28, but I couldn't say that because that would be bragging, or that would be mean, or that would be rude, right? And she like
Mm-hmm.
hoped that someone else would say it on her
On her,
behalf,
yeah.
you know and so I think it's a lot of how we're brought up, but then on the flip side, I think, you know we don't want to make people feel bad. We also don't want to feel bad, right? Like, what if we share something and someone's like, oh, well, I make more than that, or whatever. And then there's this sort of comparison that can happen, that feels bad.
And so that's the thing that really was so interesting to me about this conversation, because I think that that's a prevalent fear for people, right? That if I share the details about the things I'm proud of, what if everyone else is like, so
Yeah.
big deal, or this, or I've done that. And we do get in our heads about comparing ourselves to everyone else, right? All of our peers, people that are in the same line of work as us. And if no one is sharing the
Mm-hmm.
details, right? Then of course we get in our heads in the comparison, because then all we have to go on is really that outward look, right? What does
Yeah.
it look like on social media? What does their business look like on the internet or in their podcast? And we don't know the truth,
Mm-hmm.
right? I not necessarily about money, but another example of this was really recently. I learned on social media about another podcast that is in a similar space as us that was celebrating, I think it was like 25,000 downloads. And in that celebration, there was like 30 or 40 people on the post that were like, wow, that's so amazing. Congratulations. I can't believe it. You're doing such a great job. Right. And I was reading all of this and I was like, oh, wait a second.
Yeah.
We have more downloads than that. And I didn't think that we were doing as well as this podcast,
Yeah.
right? In
Yeah.
particular. And so that, not to say like, oh, and we're better, but it's that same fear of comparing yourself to others without really knowing the facts.
Mm-hmm.
And you're
Yeah.
always going to kind of imagine that you're lowest on the totem pole, right?
Well, I think there's a lot in that and in what you're saying. One is like this idea that I was having, or this thought I was having the other day, is like, what if we were proud of our accomplishments, just regardless of how they compared to anyone else's, right? Like, what was it for you and I that when we were looking at our podcast stats, we weren't simply proud of what we were doing?
Yeah.
Why was the mental approach to be, it should be more, or
That's
this
not
should
enough.
be better? Exactly.
Yeah.
There was a built-in assumption that we had that was incorrect to a certain extent, right? And since then, or maybe you've looked at different types of statistics and you're able to kind of compare us to some industry benchmarks, and we've learned more about, things that we're doing well, the percentage of the episode that people listen to, the number of times it's downloaded within 7 to
30
30 days
days.
of release.
Yeah.
It's like these are all really exciting things, and there is both this, like, I think, benefit to knowing how you're doing, right? But also at the same time, I want us and I want founders to be proud of what we've accomplished without having to compare ourselves to others. So it's
Hmm.
like an interesting catch 22, right? And when we're talking about this in celebration and in this conversation, about these gentlemen that I kept hearing having these conversations, it's like, you know, I want that. I sort of want it all for everyone. I want us to be, if we are proud of ourselves, to say we have, 28,000 downloads in, I don't remember the number of episodes. And you know what I mean? And we've earned this much in revenue, or we've had our highest revenue month ever. And that might be someone else's lowest revenue month of the year, but that doesn't matter, because for us, it is a win. For us, it is progress. And one of the things, I guess it's like sort of in line with this, that we talk a lot about in both of the businesses, Sarah Delavan Consulting and the Good Food CFO, is that we're running our own race.
Yeah.
And I want to bring it back to, your story, like from Starbucks, right? Is like, you left, you made a very difficult decision. You took 6 months off. And some people would look at that in one way and say, I'm so proud of her for doing that. I could, see that you were working like crazy and that you were just worn out by the time you
Yeah.
got through 2 years of COVID. And other people might say, man, she's lazy, or how is she going to afford that? Or who knows what negative thing that they were going to say. Right. But you are like, this is my life. This is my body. This is my health. This is my money. And I'm running my own race. And
Yeah.
this is what I need. And I am proud of myself for resting. Right. So
And
it's like,
even that was hard, right?
mm-hmm.
Like, and when we go back to that comparison thing, right? Is I think it's really hard to not compare yourself.
Yeah.
That in its own way is a practice.
Yeah.
Even in the decision to, as you said, run my own race, there was a lot of time where I would sit around going, oh, I'm not doing enough. I'm not producing. I'm being lazy, as you
Mm-hmm.
said.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, no, I wasn't. I was resting my body
Recovering,
and
really.
recovering.
Yeah.
Exactly. And look where it led me.
Yeah. And so I think, like, to answer that very loaded question that you asked, I don't know how many minutes ago now, but all of these things I think keep us from sharing, right? We don't want to be braggy if we have done well. It's difficult to feel proud of ourselves if we're concerned that the person we're sharing it with is going to think it's a silly win, or like not that big or small in comparison to theirs. You know what I mean? And I think those types of fears, they keep us quiet, right? Inside the Good Food CFO community and in the conversations that we have here, I've always, I've always wanted it to be a safe space where we could say numbers, we could say, this is the reality of what's happening in my business. Because I think when you do that, you get the applause that you deserve and the support if you need it, right? People are more able to meet you where you're at when they really know where you're at. And I think it can be difficult not to compare when you hear someone else's numbers, right? Even if it's just you comparing yourself to them, whether it's sort of positive or negative comparison in your mind. But there is value, I think, to hearing a founder say, my first year in consulting that I tracked my revenue, I made $36,000. And I think that that was like 2020. And I would never have said that publicly before, because
Hmm.
$36,000 is like not impressive, right? It's not in my mind, right? It's not
Yeah.
impressive. It's not the kind of income that people, talk about on social media. I was not sitting on a beach, while I was doing the consulting and making that money. I was like working really hard and figuring out my tools and figuring out how to serve my clients. And when I hit $36,000 after being in business for 2 years prior, like full time, I was really, really proud of myself. And then I guess I didn't do the math before this, but then the next year I hit 109,000, which to me was just this like radical growth. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? From 36 to now three digits, it's 109. And it was, me, um, an assistant named Robin who worked like 5 hours a week, just helping me do some of the not the easy work, but some of the repetitious like work that I needed some support with. And then I think Keisha, our VP of operations, she was working like maybe 10 hours a week,
Yeah.
helping to make things efficient and like run well. And, you know, I was ecstatic about that number. Do you think I told a single person? I didn't. I didn't tell a soul. I told my
Mm.
husband because he knew that I made 36,000 the year before and less
Yeah.
than that the 2 years prior. You know what I mean? But it's like, you know, now it seems like, dang, I wish I did celebrate that, more proudly back then because it was a very big accomplishment. I had started my own business and I was succeeding. And not only that, we had people on the team, which makes me very happy and lights me up. And I was working for people that I really enjoyed,
Yeah.
and in the spirit of transparency and in hopes of encouraging, people to talk about this, I will share that the annual income like this year for SDC is about $165,000. And that's roughly the exact same amount of money it was last year. And
Hmm.
I think that people might be surprised perhaps to hear that that's the number. I don't know. I don't know if people presume that that business is larger than that in terms of revenue or smaller than that in terms of revenue, but something that we're celebrating regardless of how that compares to any other business is that we brought on a full-time financial analyst in
I was hoping you
May.
were going to bring this up.
Yeah, we brought on that analyst. Her name is Rachel. We brought her on in May because, quite frankly, doing $160,000 in annual revenue as a solo consultant, the only one who's doing that work, was exhausting. I was maxed out, and I knew that I needed help. We had been running a very lean business, to that date. So we had money in the bank, I didn't take all the money and spend it and have fun. I paid myself a very, you know, modest but enough salary. And there was money in the bank that allowed us to bring someone on and not have to grow the business exponentially to get by. And, I think that that's important to share because we had Martha from Storied Goods on, and we talked about how she slowed down and how she didn't focus on growth and she focused on the foundations of her business. And that's exactly what we did in 2023. And we made that decision consciously so that we could onboard her and get her feeling really, really good and confident in her role to free up some of my time so that we could, number one, focus on the launch of the Good Food CFO as its own brand, having its own
Hmm.
website, having its own community, and making sure that we were able to iterate and make it what we are proud of. Speaking of things we're proud of. And then knowing that we wanted to take this podcast weekly, I needed more time to be able to do that. And so we're seeing the fruits of our labor and the fruits of our decisions, despite, not quote unquote growing or scaling our business this year. The growth we did was internal. We grew
Yeah.
our team. And I think it's important to share those numbers, as scary it is as it is for me to sit here and do it. But it's important to me, and it's important that, people listening know that, we're different types of founders, but we experience the same types of things, and we make the same types of difficult decisions. And I want all of us to celebrate the things that we are proud of, and for some people that might be cash flow positive for, a week or 2 weeks or 4 weeks. It might be a positive, profit on the bottom of a P&L. It might be landing one new customer. It could be anything. Just, I want us to be able to celebrate what we're proud of. And I want us to be able to come out and also say, I didn't do great. I had a rough month. You know, whatever the situation is, and then we can gather around that person and support them, in figuring it out, because we shouldn't have to go through it alone, not in the hard times and not in the good times either.
I totally hear what you're saying about really being able to connect with each other on a deeper level, right? What I'd love to hear you expand more on is why money?
Mm, that's a great question. I think that in our society, money has a lot of power, and money defines a lot of people, or some of us allow it to define us, right? I mean, we live in a society where celebrities, movie stars, people with fancy cars, people with certain jewelry, people with a certain kind of, you know, bag, shoe, you name it, right? These like external things, they are idolized, they are valued, they are validated. And what that, at least for me, what that has said for a long time has been, your worth is in what you have. Your worth is connected to your finances, how fancy your car is, right? And the home that you live in, these are all representative of your worth, your financial
Mm-hmm.
worth. But I think for a lot of people, it goes deeper to your personal worth. And so, I think that connects very directly to what I was saying earlier, where if you are someone who doesn't want to quote brag, right? Like a woman who's made $500,000 in a year or $1 million in a year, you may not say that out loud for one reason or another, right? Even though you're getting a lot of value and worth about it, you might not talk about it, but you might have new jewelry, you might have new things, you might show it that way, right? And then you feel valued, versus someone who's like proud of the work that they're doing and they're not making a lot of money compared to others, right? Then we're going to keep that secret because we feel like, well, I'm not as valuable. I've not, you know, generated the wealth and the worth that someone else has. And I think step number one is to, and you didn't ask me for steps on how to change this, but I think, recognizing that like we aren't anything external, right, is like number one. And I think until me a couple of years ago would never have said those numbers publicly. I never did say those numbers publicly because I was connected, my worth, my value, my competence as a founder of a business and a CEO was directly connected to those numbers. Now I realize that number is important. It is important because it's how much I get to pay myself. It's how much I get to pay the team. And I'll be quite honest and frank with you. I want to make a lot of money. Just like Jessica Knoll said, I want to be rich because when we're rich, we can do a lot of really good things in the world and for the people
Mm-hmm.
we love. And right. But we don't have to explain what we want to do with our money. Right. I want to be rich. Do not get me wrong, but my value in the world and my level of happiness is not based on the amount of money that I make. It, for me, is based around how much time do I have with my family? How much time do I have with my friends? Am I doing work that I can feel proud of at the end of the day? Am I showing up on the podcast and saying things that I believe and things that think matter? And all of those things allow me to say, I am valuable as a human, you
Yeah.
know. Um so I think it's, we have a connection. We've connected our value to money, and it's very hard to then communicate. about that out loud to people. Because if you think when you say, I made $160,000 this year, that means you're worthless, why would you ever say that out loud?
Yeah.
That's such a scary thing to do.
And I think it also kind of goes back to what you were talking about before with support, right? And getting the kind of support that you need in your business through that level of transparency, right? And connecting with others with that level of transparency and having it reciprocated is how you do break that stigma,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's how you do start to understand that not only is my value not tied to the amount of money that I bring in, but I can have frank, honest conversations about money with other people. And in doing so, that only builds my confidence,
Mm-hmm.
right? In how I deal with money.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that we can say that, like, it's not all about money sometimes, right? And like money shouldn't have that much power over us. And we are not, the amount of money that we have or do not have, right? And then at the same time, like, I want a lot of money. You know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah.
a complicated, confusing, weird thing. But I think one of the central ideas for me here in hearing those guys, all of those men talking, is that there is transparency, support, there is the non-requirement of like doing good, you know, attached to the money. And I think that that's really big for women. Like we often say, like, um, you know, I believe, for me, for example, like I believe in everything that I do and that we do and what we're doing. I am doing the work for the greater good, right? But like I also work for money. And if
Mm-hmm.
in my mind, if our company is making $1 million a year, it means that we are doing a good job. It means we are delivering products and services that have value, and it means that we're moving things forward in the direction that we want to, right?
Yeah.
But I also, at the same time that that's true, I don't want it to have to. I don't want us to have to explain it that way. That like we're doing good and money is the byproduct.
Yeah.
You know, it's a very complicated conversation, and I encourage people like to read the article again by Jessica Knoll, because she talks about that. She talks about how, like, I don't want to have to do good with my money. I don't want to have money be a byproduct, right? And like I follow her on Instagram. She works hard, but she also rests. She practices her craft. You know what I mean? She is a woman who is like, I'm going to be the greatest that I can possibly be at my career. And I'm not going to be sorry for trying really hard. I'm not going to be sorry for putting in the effort. I'm not going to be sorry if someone tells me that, I'm an overachiever or I'm too much or I'm like, you name it. I want to be an amazing writer. I want to be a screenwriter, and I want to be rich just like men are when they do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I want women to be able to have those types of conversations, to say those types of sentences when we're talking about what we're trying to do in the world. And no, not what we're trying to do in the world, who we want to be in the world.
Sarah, I hear you. I hear everything that you're saying. And I think that some people might be listening in their car or at home and thinking, wait, but you're saying that money shouldn't hold power over you. Money shouldn't determine your value, but you want money and you want to do good in the world, but you don't want to have to say that you want to do good in the world in order to make money. Like it's a very back and forth, right? It might
Mm-hmm.
seem confusing. It might seem like these things are at odds with each other, but I think ultimately what you're saying really, if I can, kind of bring it all together here, is that none of those things are mutually exclusive,
Mm-hmm.
right? They can all be true, and that's okay. And that the point is around the transparency, being able to talk about it is where you do no longer let money or your feelings about your value, right, hold power over you, and you start to sit in your own power.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great way to summarize it. It's like it's complicated.
Yeah.
It's complicated. And the one thing I know for sure is that when I, like, even today and sitting here and throwing out numbers that I never had thrown out before, there's so much freedom in that.
Yeah.
There's a, there's, because it's like step number one in saying, like, this is where I am right now. And I am proud of myself. I'm proud of our team, and it might pale in comparison to someone else's annual revenue. And I'm okay with that because we are running our own race. Our race is nowhere near over. And we have clear vision for what we are doing and want to be doing. Right. And it, yeah, it's like, as you said, it's like I'm sitting in my own power having
Mm-hmm.
done that. It also, when you break that seal of saying, I want to be rich, I want to help other people be rich, that feels very powerful as well because it's not a secret anymore.
Yeah.
Right. And I think, and this may be true for other women, other people in general, that for me, I can only speak for myself, but like there'll be a woman, like maybe we'll take, I always get her last name wrong, but Sarah Blakeney or Blakely, who was is the founder of Spanx, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
she's made a lot of money. She had a vision. She went after it. She's been successful, and we aspire to follow in her footsteps, but yet we feel we still have bad feelings around making money or having money, right? And so I think a big part of this work is understanding your money story, understanding what are the things about money that make you feel bad or weird or kind of hold you back from just fully going for it, because it's not going to be the same for everybody. Um,
Yeah.
and I think doing that work is really important, and then working toward talking about money in whatever your safe space is, right? Those three guys in the wine bar, that was their safe group, right? They may or may not go out and to have that conversation with anybody
The
else in their
world.
community,
Yeah.
right? But like they were having it. I practice talking about money with people. I practice saying, this is my rent, and this is out of my budget. I got really comfortable telling people, someone would say, hey, can you come and do this thing? It's not in the budget for this summer. I'm sorry. Maybe invite me again in the future. Like maybe I'll have the money in the budget again. And being okay with saying no for the reason that I'm saying no, because it's
Yeah.
out of my budget. Where in the past, I might have on a personal level said, yeah, we can make that happen and like charge it on a credit card and not have the money for it, but be afraid to say no, right? I'm only hurting myself, my family finances in that scenario. It happens for businesses all of the time, right? And I think when we talk about money, when we gain confidence around money and understand our money sort of like issues, we can then have more power, as you were saying, over money instead of it over us. And I think then reach our full potential
Yeah.
in business and in life.
And that's kind of the whole purpose, right, of even this conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. Chelsea, thank you so much for joining me here on this first episode of what is going to be a very exciting and full season. I'm looking forward to the rest of it.
Yeah, me too. For more content like this, in connection with other good food founders and industry experts, join us inside the Good Food CFO community. Visit thegoodfoodcfo.com/join to learn more.
Thank you for joining us here today. If you enjoyed this episode or found it helpful or inspiring in any way, please share it with your founder friends on social and rate and review the podcast wherever you listen. It's the #1 way to help good food founders find the show. We'll be back with a brand new episode next week.